COP28, 6 themes. And now we're at theme number 6, delivering for nature and people. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and we're going to wrap up Robert Lyman's perspectives on 6 COP28 themes with this one on nature and biodiversity. We've gone through 5 other key points that Robert Lyman has outlined will probably be the most important at COP28. COP28 is the big climate conference that's going on in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, and in a city that is definitely built by big oil in the middle of the desert. Beautiful city, marvel, wondrous marvel, but it's not running on wind and solar. So we wanted to talk with you about these because of decisions that happen there, very far away, that people often think, oh, it's only the environmental group that's over there, what do we care? They're going to affect you right here in Canada or whatever country you're in, and perhaps not in a way that you would like. Perhaps so. Many people are in favor of some of these initiatives. Many people are in favor of them until it comes to their pocketbook, until they realize, oh, net zero means I don't have a job. So these things that sound good on the surface often have very big impacts and implications for your personal life once they're implemented. So that's why it's important to talk about them and think about the consequences. So let's see what Robert found for us. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of my own sidebar when we get to the Indigenous aspects, because that's a very big part of how the UN groups see the world now. And I'll explain a bit more about that when we get there. So we've covered these 5 themes of COP28, and you can find these videos online. The last one is delivering for nature and people. That's what we'll cover today. So the goal of COP28 with respect to that is the conference will seek to promote a global commitment to stop and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030 and to help close the massive financial gap on nature-based solutions. In other words, it will seek additional commitments of money from the Annex II countries for nature-related purposes that are not particularly clear. But Canada, the Canadian government, is very keen on nature-based climate solutions. They want you to see nature as something new. Human beings have survived on this earth for thousands of years in relative balance with our natural surroundings. However, now we're witnessing a unique period in history when human activities are out of balance with nature, causing planet-wide climate change and biodiversity loss. Increased GHGs, greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, are changing the climate of the planet, resulting in extreme temperatures, floods, droughts, wildfires, and increasing biodiversity loss. Well, I must interject there because even the IPCC does not see extreme weather, floods, droughts as signs of climate change, not as individual events. Climate change is measured in 30, 50, 100-year and millennial timescales. So having a handful of extreme weather events here and there is not evidence of climate change. And there's also quite a bit of dispute about whether or not fossil fuel industrial emissions are driving climate change, or whether Mother Nature is the strongest force. And I invite you to look at our most recent event with Dr. Ian Clark and see what he has to say about that, or look through our past events because we host the views of dissenting scientists. So now that I've explained that, let's see what else we can find here. So here's the federal government definition of what is net zero. Achieving net zero emissions means our economy either emits no greenhouse gas emissions or offsets its emissions, for example, through actions such as tree planting. Excuse me, that one made me choke up a little bit. Or employing technologies that can capture carbon before it's released into the air. This is essential to keeping the world safe and livable for our kids and grandkids. Well, we dispute that, and we dispute all of this as well. However, we continue. Oh, look, there's the 1 Trillion Tree Org. This is a World Economic Forum venture with Mark Benioff. They want to plant 1 trillion trees worldwide, and it has come to Canada. So that's why there's this crazy rush to plant a lot of trees. But trees actually also emit carbon dioxide, especially when they die. So it's not the best solution for absorbing carbon dioxide. Factual background. So we're going back to Robert Lyman's statements now. Various United Nations organizations have been working for years to create a close linkage between climate and biodiversity issues. They have used similar techniques to gain public profile, and they've proposed similar funding approaches. And biodiversity is not dealt with in the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change, but it is the focus of the UN Convention on Biodiversity. COP27's implementation plan, that's the previous climate conference, emphasized the importance of protecting, conserving, and restoring nature and ecosystems that act as sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gas emissions, and encouraged countries to slow, halt, and reserve forest cover and carbon loss as part of their mitigation and adaptation plans. The UN Environment Programme's State of Finance for Nature report 2022 found that finance flows to nature-based solutions are currently 154 billion US per year, only a third of the investment the UN says is needed to limit global temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, to halt biodiversity loss, and achieve land degradation neutrality. Now, just remember that the finance flows to nature-based solutions means people are just buying carbon credits on forests. And this can also be described as the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one, which is how Mark Shapiro framed carbon markets in Harper's in February of 2010. So this is what Robert Lyman referred to at a meeting in Vancouver in August 2023. Representatives from 185 countries agreed to establish a $200 billion global biodiversity fund to support global conservation. That is to protect 30% of land and coastal areas by 2030. The UN is seeking at least $20 billion US per year from developed countries by 2025. In addition, Brazil has announced that at COP28, it will propose the establishment of a huge fund to pay for the conservation of tropical forests, some 60% of which is in the Amazon basin. So, in some ways, you might consider that people will be trying to finance their national operations through selling carbon credits for their natural biodiversity resources and conservation places. And boom, look at this. This is not what Robert Lyman wrote. This is what I just found today, that Abacus Data came out with this survey saying that there's widespread support for tackling climate change and reconciliation cost effectively through First Nations Guardians programs. Well, what do you think that is? Well, that's Indigenous Guardians are trained experts who care for lands and waters on behalf of their First Nations. They test water quality, manage protected areas, restore species at risk, monitor development projects, and support language and culture programs. There are more than 160 First Nation Guardians programs now operating across Canada. And look at this. They say it's not hard to see why. Most Canadians are acutely aware of climate change's impacts, from increased wildfires and flooding to landslides and destruction of animal habitats and communities. Of course, as I've mentioned, this is not evidence of climate change, wildfires and flooding. They see Indigenous guardians playing a helpful role in grappling with these challenges. And here's a list of all the different things that they think that Indigenous people would be doing. But in terms of land guardians, actually almost half the Indigenous people of Canada live in cities, and many of them are now integrated into high-profile professional occupations. But this is a very big thing, especially for Canada. It's a big and a growing thing. And it's also very, very big at the UN COP conference, because they see that Indigenous territories constitute 20% of the Earth's landmass, but that it harbors 80% of Earth's remaining biodiversity. So going back to Robert Lyman's comments on COP28 initiatives in this regard, he says the United Nations reports on biodiversity are largely based on the IPCC's worst case RCP 8.5 scenario. That's an implausible scenario, and have claimed that climate change will increase the intensity and frequency of fires, storms, and droughts. A frequently cited 2022 UN report estimated that 1 million species are at risk, 25% of species are threatened, and that 25,000 to 30,000 species per year could become extinct. But Robert goes on to say that few academic studies support such alarming claims. In fact, one academic study found that less than 1% of all organisms are recorded to have become extinct in the last few centuries, and there are no empirical data to support estimates of current extinctions of 100 or even 1 species per day. So that's by Neil Stork. And the good news is, in the August 2021 IPCC report, Roger Pielke Jr. reported that the great news is the extreme scenario that the IPCC saw as most likely in 2013 is now judged a low likelihood. So RCP 8.5 is off the table. And you can see that once that's gone, the climate emergency is over, and we do have time. He's also noted that RCP 6.0 is pretty implausible as well. So, this is where we were in emissions ratios in 2017, and we haven't really moved the needle that much upward. So, in fact, most recently, the UNFCCC was reporting that we were below RCP 4.5 emissions estimate. So, there's no climate emergency. We do have time. Now, going back to Robert's comments on the biodiversity and nature and people issue, the UN's efforts to closely link the climate and biodiversity issues will probably be strongly supported by the ENGO community, the financial institutions that see profits in the creation of biodiversity credits, and by the developing countries that see yet another avenue by which to secure a large increase in financial transfers from the developed to the developing countries. And you might be asking yourself, well, how would that occur? Well, for instance, if you're a corporation in a wealthy country and you have a lot of emissions, theoretically you could buy nature credits in one of these developing nations. I just tell them, okay, you can never cut down this forest. I'm going to buy these credits from you. You're going to hold them for 100 years, and I'll pay you money. I'll pretend I haven't emitted because I'm supporting your forest conservation project or your biodiversity project to keep your special little frogs safe and sound, or birds, or some other mammal or such like. And again, theoretically, there would be a local indigenous group who has the wisdom of their elders managing and supervising that property. And so, in effect, that's what people would be paid for, and that's what the corporations and tax-paying public would pay for in order to mitigate their sins of fossil fuel use. So that's one way in which this type of arrangement could be profitable to these developing nations. In fact, what it does, it locks them into not ever developing. And then Robert goes on to say, while governments in countries like Canada, which has already agreed to provide 3/4 of the 200 million seed funding for the Global Biodiversity Fund, may be inclined to provide even more of taxpayers' money, it's doubtful that other OECD countries will go beyond approval in principle. That still will be sufficient for the COP28 sponsors to hail this as a major success of the conference. And of course, since Canada has such a vast wilderness, lots of Canadians who are into carbon trading would see this as a literal gold mine. But that probably means no development in Canada. Not really the gold rush that we're thinking of in terms of critical minerals, is it? So, in conclusion, Robert writes, COP28 will be an immense media event, and like its predecessors, an exercise in grand theater that is intended to elevate the general public's concern about the alleged dangers of human-induced climate change. The fact that over 70,000 people will attend the event will raise its profile. The background factual analysis rarely, if ever, supports the claims of impending catastrophe or the justifications of the measures being promoted by the United Nations, the European Union, and other groups. Trillions for net zero? Well, the simple reality is that nothing that is done or agreed at the conference will change the inexorable growth in the global population, economy, and energy use, and therefore in GHG emissions due to the developments in the poorer countries. That's where all the emissions are coming from right now, right? The emissions growth is coming from the developing and emerging nations. The UN will seek to create new institutions, funds, and mandates that will expand its authorities and influence, and it may succeed in some respects, but it remains highly unlikely that the developed countries will agree to provide the trillions of dollars annually that the UN and the developing countries are seeking. Without this, the net zero emissions goal by 2050 will not be met. Here we have beautiful Dubai, built by big oil, not net zero. So thanks for watching our 6-part series. We wrapped it up here with Delivering for Nature and People. I hope that you found this to be informative, and maybe it gives you some insights on things that are happening in the world of climate change, especially here in Canada, that maybe you're not aware of. In terms of, say, these Indigenous-led or Indigenous protected conservation areas that are quickly dotting the land and really, you know, in the eyes of some, they are protecting valuable heritage. In the eyes of others, they may be completely blocking any form of resource development. And it's important to realize that the Indigenous view in Canada is not monolithic. There's a very large group of Aboriginal people who see resource development, economic development, as a means to end poverty on reserve. That would be the National Coalitions of Chiefs. And then there are other groups who really want to kind of go back in time, go back to the woods, go back to nature, and stay there. They don't want modern life to really interfere with their world as they perceive it. So, these are kind of diametrically opposed viewpoints. And of course, in the middle, there's all the rest of the Canadians who see the world through various different perspectives. And as I pointed out, almost half the Aboriginal people in Canada live in the cities. So, this kind of noble savage idea of land guardians um, kind of does a disservice to contemporary people who have found, enjoyment working in law, in education, medical services, research, history, um, oil and gas, and many other trades, and even, especially the skilled trades. So, lots of things that are happening at COP28 will have a direct impact on you in Canada, on climate policies here, on resource development. So please pay attention, consider what's going on, consider the implications. I hope that you've enjoyed our little explainers. We'll have some more as we go along and we hear the news coming out of COP28. Thanks very much, and we'd love to have your support. If you can help us out financially, that would be wonderful. And if all you can do is share our material or engage with us on social media, that's great too. You know, we say that science is about inquiry, not compliance. So we'd love to chat. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science.